If you are a sports fan or routinely talk sports with other people, a phrase you've probably heard a lot when talking about head coaches is he hasn't won anything. You'll say James Franklin, and somebody say he hasn't won anything. Or you'll talk about Lincoln Riley, and somebody will say, but what has he won? And we all know that when somebody says they haven't won anything, it doesn't mean anything. It means they haven't won a national title. Sports fans naturally love to circulate the debate around rings and winning championships. And in college football, it feels like nobody has won anything, if that's your mentality, because there's so few coaches that have actually won national titles. If we look at the 2023 season, there were just 6 active head coaches in college football that had national titles, that had won something. Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, he had won the title, obviously, at Florida State. Mac Brown, who's at North Carolina, he'd won one at Texas. Kirby and Nick Saban obviously had wins, Dabo Swinney with a couple rings, and then Jim Harbaugh won at the end of the 2023 season. But after that season, what was already a pretty small number, just 6 head coaches out of 134 at the FBS level, and really 70 when you're talking about at a power conference level, still a small ratio. That offseason, a lot changed. Jimbo Fisher got fired. Mac Brown got let go. Nick Saban retired. Jim Harbaugh left for the NFL. And it left us with just 2 active head coaches that had national titles, which is mind-blowing. It almost is extremely difficult to accomplish this. But in an era where Saban dominated and won a ton of titles, and Dabo emerged and Kirby emerged, it makes a lot of sense that this eventually ended up happening. With that being said, we're due for a lot of head coaches now to win their first ever national title, like Ryan Day did last season. He was one of those guys where people prior to last year would say, yeah, but he hasn't won anything. There was hot seat talk. There was a ton of ridiculousness because he hadn't won anything. And then what do you know? He goes and wins a national title. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the 10 head coaches who might win their first national title next, based on how likely they are to be the next guy to do it. And there's a lot of great candidates right now, which is why we're going to start with the honorable mentions. Looking at these honorable mentions, I know some of you are jumping out of your chairs being like, what on earth is this guy talking about? Some of the logos that are here, we've got Tulane and South Florida and Boise State. Allow me to explain the reasoning for these head coaches. A lot of them are on this list, and I don't think they could win a national title at their current school. But based on their projections on possibly getting a promotion or getting hired at a Big Ten or SEC school or a school capable of winning a national title, I think that leap could be made. In a lot of cases, that's why these guys are honorable mention. We still need something that's relatively unforeseen to happen. Like with Matt Campbell and Chris Kleiman, their names get circulated in the rumor mill every offseason. And if Matt Campbell never leaves Iowa State, he'll probably never win a national title. But he might be okay with that. He might understand how college football works and be okay with that. Chris Kleiman's kind of in the same boat. And I know you guys have all heard their names get hurled around before. With Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State, the Sun Devils, I think he could do it. But I think he's so far off from having a roster and a program that's capable of doing that. If he's going to do it at Arizona State, he needs a lot more time to truly, truly build up the infrastructure there, which is absolutely there. The recruiting's at a very high level. A lot is upgrading for Arizona State, but it really feels like they're at least another 5-10 years away from getting really serious about those conversations. But I do buy into Kenny Dillingham being there for a long time because he's a Sun Devil alum and he's given every indication he intends on staying. And Kenny Dillingham is the type of authentic coach that you really believe his word when you hear it. I know there's some fans out there that would argue they'll always leave. They're snakes. And those are people that have been hurt by coaches that were maybe alum or alma maters, and they went and left anyways. John Summerall and Alex Golish, I definitely wanted to give a shout out to, and we'll just group Spencer Danielson with that bunch as well. All young, exciting head coaches that have had successes, mainly Danielson and Summerall that have had more successes. Golish is still getting things up to speed at South Florida, but all guys that I anticipate will eventually have power conference head coaching jobs, and when they have those jobs, they'll have an opportunity to do something really exciting and potentially elevate to the point where they're in a position to contend. Mario Cristobal could win one at Miami. I think that's totally possible with the talent acquisition, all the stuff he's doing, but I'll believe it when I see it. They've collapsed in November quite a few times now. He just has not shown an ability to finish off those big games. Kurt Cignetti, you can't ignore what he just did. He deserves an honorable mention because of how outstanding that turnaround was at Indiana. I think they could get to that level eventually. Obviously, they weren't quite at that level this last year, but still, we're in a great position. Rhett Lashley at SMU, that program is elevating. Their investment level is there, and Lashley's shown a lot of great things. And then, of course, Sonny Dykes. I feel like you have to include him as at least an honorable mention just because they were like getting a good draw in the national title game away from winning a national title. And I know they ended up getting blown out, and you could argue there was some flukiness that TCU year, but to not even have him as an honorable mention after making the national title, I feel like would have been pretty silly. So those are the honorable mentions. Let's get into the top 10. Coming in at number 10, I've got Josh Hypel. Hypel is a guy that has been really awesome for Tennessee football. He has immediately flipped them around, and I think thus far in his career, he's already had a season where he had a team that I thought was capable of winning a national title, and that was that 2022 team. They went 11-1. They won the Orange Bowl. If it wasn't for a collapse at South Carolina, they would have been in the CFP and one of the favorites there. You look at what Hypel's done so far, 65-23, a really excellent winning percentage. At UCF, there was actually a little bit of struggles, but he gets to Tennessee and that just seems to subside. If you had to talk about the biggest strength with Hypel, it's absolutely his flexibility, the way he's been able to adapt, the way he's been able to change his defensive identity, and the defense has really gotten up to speed. On offense, when they haven't had the quarterback play they've wanted, they've transitioned into a dominant running team. When they have the passing game they want, they transition into a team that attacks you down the field. His schemes and the way he's able to adapt on both sides of the football as a leader is really impressive, and that's one of the things that leads me to believe he's totally capable of doing it. He could be one of the next guys to win their first national title, but a big hurdle for them has been the consistent title-level offense. You had that, I think, in 2022, a consistent title-level offense. But the last two seasons, without having a future NFL signal caller at the helm, although I guess Joe Milton technically is, but he was inconsistent in his own right, they've just been extremely volatile on that side of the football. And even with Tim Banks getting that defense righted and getting them in a great spot, they've had concerns with that inconsistency on offense. This year, I'm afraid it might be more of the same because of the weird quarterback drama, the Nico stuff. And so that's the one thing that I think is still lagging a little bit for Tennessee and for Hypel. If he wants to elevate and take that next step towards title contention, they just need more consistency from that side of the football. Number 9 in this list is going to be Lincoln Riley, and there's a lot of people that have a lot of opinions on Lincoln Riley. Trust me, I know. What you cannot debate about Lincoln Riley is the fact that he has the mind to run a title-worthy offense, and he has shown that year in and year out. And that's never been the knock on Riley. No one's ever knocked him because he can't produce on offense. It's very clearly what he can produce. It's been the defense, one side of the football that is severely lacking. But recently, he has shifted, and his commitment to defense has risen quite a bit, and it hasn't just been words. It's been in recruiting, and it was actually between the white lines last year, which I think is the more important part. And so with that philosophy change, I think he's going to have an opportunity. He's still a relatively young head coach, and he's made several college football playoffs, and he had some fantastic teams at Oklahoma. I'd say his best season was in 2017, that Baker Mayfield-led squad that lost in overtime in the college football playoff semis. I really feel like if they don't lose that game, they've got an excellent chance at winning the national title that year. Biggest strength, obviously, offensive firepower, and the biggest hurdle, defense, defense, defense. I do think they're rounding a corner under D'Anton Lynn. And if they have a plus defense this year, the conversation around Riley is going to flip very fast. Like, that upside is still pretty crazy with him as a head coach. And at USC, in an NIL era, you absolutely can do that. At number 8, I've got Mike Elko. This might be a semi-surprising name to see on here because Elko, compared to some of the other head coaches on here, not very seasoned at all. He only has 3 full seasons as a head coach at the FBS level, but what you really like to see with Mike Elko is the fact that he's at a program that has this fantastic, vast pool of resources to enable him in order to be successful and be competing for a national title. Texas A&M has just been waiting for the right guy to come along to right the ship. And if Elko is that right guy, which at this point I would say he is, there's a chance maybe he isn't. Maybe it doesn't work out. They had a late collapses last year. But I think he's the right guy. They're a top 10 team in the preseason for me. There's a crazy, outlandish scenario where A&M could win it all this year. I don't think that'll necessarily happen, but I think they're on the right track. Absolutely. Elko, you can see the small sample size, 24-14 as a head coach. His best season was at Duke, where they won the Military Bowl. So exactly what I'm talking about, but he's a substance over flash guy, which is exactly what Texas A&M needs. And as far as a hurdle, I'd say battered Aggie syndrome, because that's something that always exists. You feel like something terrible is going to happen with Texas A&M and to Texas A&M, but I think it's silly. It would be silly to suggest that whoever is leading Texas A&M doesn't have a chance at winning a national title, given the vast pool of resources that the Aggies have to offer and how committed they are to trying to become a winning football team. At number 7 on this list, I've got Lane Kiffin. At this point, a journeyman as a head coach. He's had multiple different stops, but it really feels like he's found his fit at Ole Miss. And I know one of the main pushbacks with Kiffin might not be that he can't win a national title, but it might be that he can't necessarily do it at Ole Miss. And to that, I actually disagree. I think last season, Ole Miss had a roster and a team that was good enough to win or compete for a national title, and they just choked it. They flat out choked it. But there's absolutely an alternate world out there where that team is more consistent and puts it together and is in a position to win a national title. We saw their potential with that dominant win over Georgia they had. They just didn't have the consistency, which you could argue maybe is one of Lane Kiffin's weaknesses as a head coach. But he's a guy that absolutely has shown he can acquire talent, he can build the roster, and he can build the staff that's capable of competing for a national title. And so I think Lane Kiffin could be the next guy to do it. And he could do it at Ole Miss if things break the right way. I don't think it's necessarily going to happen this year. It feels like a transition year, but down the line, absolutely. Number 6, just outside the top half of this list, I've got Brian Kelly. There's a lot of people with very strong opinions on Brian Kelly, as is the case with many of the coaches on this list, but Kelly is particularly the subject of scrutiny a lot of the time. People talk about big game Brian and the fact that Kelly seemingly can't win a big game to save his life. And while I agree, recently there's been like a slight trend, and at Notre Dame there was sometimes, of not being able to finish some of those big games, but it's just because Kelly's on the big stage so often, and you can't knock a guy for being successful enough to be noticed by people. And he's actually won some big games over the years, believe it or not. In 2012, he made a national title at Notre Dame. They did get blown out by Alabama, but he's a guy that's certainly capable of doing it. You look at the talent acquisition, which is one of the main and most important things. He's absolutely had some teams that are good enough to do it, and acquiring talent has been his MO. He's also built some fantastic staff. So the acquiring talent thing applies to both his staff and his players. They've just had the big game issue at times. Big game Brian, LSU in the non-conference especially has lost some big matchups with Brian Kelly at the helm. And then there's the relatability aspect I would list as a weakness, just because it feels like he's not a very relatable guy, and I think maybe that's what rubs people the wrong way. And it feels like somehow cosmically and tangibly, maybe that's affected his ability to finish seasons and compete for a national title. But at LSU, a program that every once in a while pops off and wins a national title with a guy like Kelly at the helm, I think it'd be silly to suggest he can't win a national title sometime soon. At number 5 on this list, I'm going to put Marcus Freeman. Freeman has been a head coach that has literally just been like Iron Man, where every time he has a weakness or a flaw exposed, he just comes back better, and having guarded that weakness and gotten better as a head coach and just more well-rounded. And it's just pretty uncanny the way he's able to do it year after year. There have been some lows. They've lost terrible games. They've lost games to Stanford teams that weren't close to a bowl. They lost NIU. They lost to Marshall at home. And yet they just bounce back every time, it seems. And Freeman is still figuring things out as a head coach, obviously, but they were the runners-up last year. They made it to the national title. It was a pretty phenomenal run in 2024. Their team identity gets stronger every year, and Freeman gets his guys up for big games. They show up in these big games. There's never been a big marquee matchup where they haven't shown up for. There's the small game lapses to be concerned about, and the fact that Notre Dame under Marcus Freeman has never had like a dominant passing game. That's usually been the most inconsistent part, but you get the feeling as he continues to get better and better, and as Denbrock, as his OC, gets more and more, acclimated to Notre Dame, maybe they'll eventually develop that elite passing game, and then maybe that's the key step they need. CJ Carr, a guy to get excited about this year. Maybe not this year, maybe a couple years down the line, but Notre Dame's capable of winning it all this year, and we'll see what happens. So Marcus Freeman at number 5. Coming in at number 4 on this list is going to be James Franklin, a head coach that is pretty infamous in college football, much like a few of the other names I mentioned. And people are going to comment this, I can guarantee it. They will say, Franklin just lost to Freeman in the college football playoffs. How could you have him above Marcus Freeman? I would actually say, I think in the long haul, if I had to bet on one of these two head coaches, Freeman and Franklin, who's going to win a national title guaranteed, I would probably bet on Freeman in the long term. But this list is about which head coach will win a national title next. And Penn State, this is their year. The amount of production they return, all of the players they have back, they've got a veteran leader in Drew Aller at quarterback. They've got the 2 elite running backs coming back in Katron Allen, Nick Singleton. The roster this year gets me excited. But talking in terms of a long-term lens throughout his career, will James Franklin win a national title? I would lean towards the answer to that being yes, because he's had them in the position to be in that conversation and in that atmosphere every year. Their one weakness has been the big boys, and I'm not talking about like Oregon. No offense to Oregon. Or like running into a USC or running into a program like that. The fact that they have to run into a Ohio State every year, I feel like is their biggest weakness. If you took that same Penn State team that just made the same run under James Franklin and you plopped them into like the old Pac-12, let's say, I think they're coming out on top a lot more times than not, versus they just got pitted in the Big Ten against Jim Harbaugh's Michigan team and against Ohio State. And yeah, they obviously didn't look as good by comparison. And every year they had to play those guys. So they'd get inflicted with a couple losses, except for a few years where they flukily pulled it out. So the biggest strength is obviously consistency. Franklin consistently has them there as a contender, but they have not been recruiting at an elite enough level to consistently test those big boys. And that's been the issue. And so we'll see. Something's got to give. I think either eventually Penn State breaks through and is able to reach those elite recruiting classes. I'm talking like top 3 in the country, like Ohio State's capable of doing, and like that level. Or eventually they have a team like this year's team with the chemistry and consistency to just put together a complete season and just win because they've played together for long enough and they put everything together. I love the fact that he hired Jim Knowles this last offseason. I thought it was one of the best hires Franklin's ever made. It's what gives me faith and confidence that this year could be their year. At number 3, though, I'm going to go with Dan Lanning. Lanning is a guy that is a fiery head coach. It is hard to not get just excited with his infectious attitude and love for the game, and that's really helped him with the Ducks. He has got a modern approach, and he is just a fiery guy. And at Oregon, you're talking about the pool of resources again, just like we were talking about with Texas A&M. Arguably even more vast, especially in the NIL era with the Ducks. There's been all this stuff, unlimited NIL. I'm not sure if that's true specifically, but something close to it is probably true. And Lanning's been able to unlock a lot of successes for the Ducks. I feel like they might be starting to round a corner from a program that is just really good from year to year to a program that legitimately reloads into being like an elite contender every year. And this year will be a big test for that. They've got a new quarterback they're breaking in. They've got a lot of questions and new players they're going to be having to try and break in this season. So the jury is still kind of out on whether or not Lanning can do that. But in this era, I don't see any reason why he couldn't. This last year, obviously, undefeated regular season. They look like the best team in the country. Then they lose to a Ohio State team that was just a buzzsaw. But absolutely, if they're in the same position next year, they might as well go win it all. Great leader, great at staff building. Lanning's made some home run hires since he's there. In some of those big games, I'd say one of the knocks against him is the big game play calling sometimes. There are questionable play calls that occur. Even in that win over Ohio State, they had some fourth downs they tried to go for. Sometimes the gambles play off. I'm even thinking back to some of those first couple games versus Washington and Oregon State that he had in his first and second years. Questionable decision-making, and in many cases, it cost them the football game. So just keeping that in mind, he'll probably fix that. He's still a very young head coach, but that would be the weakness if I had to talk about one with Lanning. At number 2 is going to be Kalin Dbor. And honestly, very close between Dbor and Lanning on this list. Ultimately, and I know this sounds hypocritical because Freeman beat Franklin and I have Franklin above Freeman. I explained my reasons there. Dbor is, I believe, 3-0 versus Dan Lanning now as a head coach, which is pretty insane to think about, especially because Dbor was outmatched in those games. Roster-wise, and so as a head coach, what he was able to do at Alabama, he's not going to be outmatched by many people talent-wise. And last year, I know it was not a very satisfactory year. It's obviously very difficult to have to follow up the greatest head coach of all time, and I think there was a lot of adverse circumstances working against them. There was the transfer portal, the fact they couldn't use it. There was the fact that Ryan Grubb left for the Seattle Seahawks like late in the offseason. There's a lot of stuff. I've talked about it in the past, but ultimately, I think Dbor long-term is going to have success at Alabama, and I think when it's all said and done, we're not going to be asking, did Kalin Dbor win a championship at Alabama? We're going to be asking, how many championships did Kalin Dbor win at Alabama? Because I truly believe he's got the ability to recruit at an elite level, which he's been showing recently, and win at Alabama football. So he's already made the national title, had an undefeated regular season at Washington and a Pac-12 title, made the Natty after beating Texas in the first round. And so at Alabama, I mean, I just think he can absolutely do that again and actually finish the thing. Play calling in big games has been fantastic, and winning. He's won everywhere he's gone. Every division of football, he's just gone and he has won. Adjusting to the SEC, you could argue, is like one of the hurdles, but one of the concerns there was recruiting. Obviously, that's not a concern. The other concern is just going to be going into those tough environments, getting the job done. Obviously, there were struggles with that in year one. So we'll see how he adjusts there. But I still think Kalin Dbor has his fastball and will absolutely flex it for years to come at Alabama. But at number 1 on this list as the head coach that I think is next up to win their first national title, it's got to be Steve Sarkeesian, right? It just feels like the natural progression and the way things have been building. Sarkeesian had his early struggles at Texas. He missed a bowl game in his first year, but they have just slowly progressed and progressed. He built things the right way from the ground up. And last year, you saw the transformation start to occur. There were some inconsistencies in Big 12 play that led you to believe maybe they'll struggle in the SEC. And then this last season in the SEC, they just ran through that thing. They did have a few bumps against Georgia, but who hasn't had that in the past? Texas showing the ability to reload. They're going to be in a great position again this year. And Sarkeesian has just got it. He just brought that program building aura with him. Looks like he learned from Nick Saban, and they're in a great position to be in that college football playoff and national title picture. They're going to be in it so routinely as a university, and him as a head coach. Sarkeesian's going to get one before his career is over, and I am most confident Sark will win a national title out of any other coach on this list. Play calling is such a strength for him. Talent acquisition, obviously a strength at Texas, and for the biggest hurdle, I just say timing. It's literally just been timing thus far. They ran into just a buzzsaw in Ohio State last year. If they don't do that, I'm not sure there's any other team I would have picked over Texas at the end of the year. And some of you might be saying, what about Georgia? Well, Georgia had Gunnar Stockton. And Gunnar Stockton, yes, scored a couple touchdowns to beat Texas in that game, yes. But full game Gunnar Stockton, I don't think they beat Texas this last year. I think Texas would have won a natty if Ohio State didn't suddenly turn it on. So that is what I think about Steve Sarkeesian. I think he will eventually win a national title. I think he's the next head coach that will do it. So there you have it, the 10 head coaches that I think are next up to win their first national title. Let me know down in the comments, which coaches on this list do you think will never win a national title? And which coaches do you know for sure are going to win a national title? I'd love to have those as receipts, look back to him, see maybe, oh wow, he absolutely nailed it. He was right. Kiffin will never win one. Or maybe, he was really wrong. Everyone that he said wouldn't win one. Just let me know down in the comments. That's all I got for this video. I appreciate you guys for watching. Always a fun time to sit down and talk about head coaches. There's a lot of very strong opinions on head coaches. People that think they're trash, think they're great, all that sort of stuff. Like literally just looking at this list, you've probably heard pretty horrific stuff said about how bad a lot of the coaches are on this list, because some people still like to subscribe to ring culture and think that if you don't win a natty, you're nothing. And we just know that's not the case in college football. Most of these coaches on this list might not win national titles, but they're still going to be considered great head coaches, and some of them Hall of Fame head coaches when it's all said and done. And that's for good reason. That's what college football is all about, is a lot more than just winning national titles, especially when you consider the way the sport is constructed. Also, don't forget College Football Preview Magazine, my preview magazine that is, available still got some physical copies in stock. They are selling fast though, so if you want to get your hands on one, I'll link it down in the bio. You can snag one if you want. My fiance showed me we're actually on the first page of Google. If you Google College Football Preview Magazine 2025, thought that was pretty awesome. Again, the digital version is always free, so feel free to go download that. Nearly 2,000 of you guys have. That's absolutely awesome. Glad a lot of you guys are going out there and making use of my hard work from the off season. So I appreciate you guys. Go get your copy. I'll link it down below if you haven't already. And then don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more of this content. Turn your notifications on. Do all of the good things that everyone asks you to do. But I'm special, so you'll do it for me. But that's all I got in this video. I will see you guys later this week.